The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed hummed with the same monotonous drone that had become the soundtrack to my dying. Room 314 at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital in Denver felt more like a tomb than a place of healing. Its sterile white walls closing in around me like the final pages of a book nobody wanted to read. I am William Harrison, billed to those who once called me friend, and at 73 years old, I've discovered that dying alone is far more terrifying than dying itself. The oxygen mask pressed against my weathered face carried the cold, metallic taste of machines, keeping me tethered to a world that seemed increasingly eager to let me go. My lungs, ravaged by decades of construction dust and too many Marlboro Reds, wheezed with each labored breath. The heart monitor beside my bed beeped irregularly, a broken metronome counting down to silence. Through the small window, Denver's skyline stretched endlessly under a gray October sky, indifferent to the man withering away on the 4th floor. If you believe that miracles still happen, or if you've ever experienced something that deeply touched your faith, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking this journey of faith together. The silence in my room wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of abandonment. 3 days had passed since my last visitor, a tired-looking social worker who'd assured me that someone from my family would surely come soon. She'd lied with practiced kindness, the way people do when they're paid to care about strangers. My son Michael lived 20 minutes away in Lakewood, close enough to visit but distant enough to pretend he couldn't hear my heart breaking. The truth settled on my chest, heavier than the pneumonia that was slowly drowning me from the inside. 47 years of marriage to Sarah, gone now these past 2 years to cancer. 3 children I'd worked myself raw to provide for, who couldn't find time to sit beside their father's deathbed. A grandson I'd taught to fish, who hadn't called since Christmas. The successful construction company I'd built from nothing, sold off to pay for medical bills and nursing home deposits that would never be needed. I closed my eyes and let the morphine carry me back to better days, the smell of fresh coffee in our little kitchen on Alameda Avenue, Sarah humming while she packed lunchboxes, the sound of children's laughter echoing through rooms that had once been full of life. But memories are cruel companions when you're dying alone. They remind you of everything you had and everything you've lost, painting the present in shades of regret so deep they hurt to look at. The night shift nurse, a kind woman named Carmen, whose gentle hands reminded me of Sarah's, checked my vitals and adjusted my IV with practiced efficiency. She spoke in soft Spanish to her colleague, and though I couldn't understand the words, the compassion in her voice was universal. They were the only human warmth I'd felt in days. "How are we doing tonight, Mr. Harrison?" Carmen asked, her accent wrapping around my name like a prayer. "Still breathing," I whispered through the mask, my voice barely audible above the mechanical symphony keeping me alive. She squeezed my shoulder gently. "That's good. That's very good." But was it? As she left and the room returned to its familiar emptiness, I wondered if breathing was really enough. What was the point of air filling damaged lungs if there was no one left who cared whether they filled or not? What was the purpose of a heart that still beat when all the people it had beaten for had walked away? The darkness outside my window deepened, and with it, the weight of my solitude grew unbearable. I had built houses that would stand for generations, raised children who had become successful in their own right, provided for a family that had wanted for nothing. Yet here I was, reduced to a patient number and a clipboard full of medications, waiting for death like a commuter waits for a delayed train. The morphine was making me drowsy, but sleep felt too much like surrender. I forced my eyes open and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square panel, until the numbers blurred together. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the soft chiming of the elevator, the muffled conversations of late-night visitors going to see patients who mattered to someone. I thought about praying, something I hadn't done with any real faith since Sarah died. What was the point? If God was listening, he had a funny way of showing it. But as the night deepened and the silence pressed closer, I found myself whispering into the darkness anyway, not really expecting an answer, just needing to hear a voice, even if it was only my own. If you're up there, I breathed into the mask. If you're listening, I don't understand this. I don't understand how it ends like this. The only response was the steady hiss of oxygen and the distant murmur of the hospital's never-sleeping machinery. But something had shifted in the room, something so subtle I almost missed it. The air felt different, charged somehow, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the very atmosphere holds its breath. I closed my eyes again, but this time, instead of memories, I felt something else approaching. A presence I couldn't name, but somehow recognized, like a half-remembered song from childhood that suddenly becomes clear. The thin hospital blanket offered little warmth against the chill that seemed to seep into my bones from somewhere deeper than the Colorado autumn. As dawn approached, painting the Denver skyline in shades of amber and rose, I found myself caught in that strange twilight between sleep and waking, where the boundaries of reality become fluid and the impossible feels within reach. My breathing had grown more labored during the night, each inhalation a conscious effort that reminded me how fragile the thread holding me to this world had become. The pneumonia was winning its battle against my weakened immune system, and the doctors' grave expressions when they thought I wasn't looking told me everything their professional optimism tried to hide. Time was running out, measured not in weeks or days, but in breaths. The morning shift change brought new voices to the hallway outside my room, fresh energy replacing the quiet exhaustion of the night crew. I heard Carmen's voice as she briefed her replacement, her words clinical but caring. Mr. Harrison in 314 had a difficult night. No visitors yet. Make sure he gets his breathing treatment at 8. No visitors yet. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge to hope, yet was a word that suggested possibility, that implied someone might still come, but I knew better. 3 days of silence from people who had once filled my dinner table every Sunday was answer enough. Whatever bridges I'd thought I'd built over the years had been burned by pride, misunderstanding, and the slow erosion of family bonds I'd been too stubborn or too busy to maintain. The new nurse, a young man named David with kind eyes and careful hands, introduced himself as he checked my chart. His presence reminded me painfully of Michael at that age. Earnest, hard-working, full of potential, I'd been too tired after long construction days to properly nurture. How many conversations had I missed? How many moments of connection had I sacrificed for the sake of providing for a family that might have preferred my presence to my paychecks? Your oxygen levels are a bit low this morning, Mr. Harrison, David said, adjusting the flow on my mask. We're going to increase this slightly. How's your pain level? I held up 3 fingers, though the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest that had nothing to do with damaged lungs. David made a note and promised to speak with the doctor about adjusting my medication. His competence was reassuring, but it also reminded me how completely I'd become dependent on the kindness of strangers. As the morning progressed, I watched the traffic build on the streets below. Ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, their lives full of purpose and connection I no longer possessed. Delivery trucks navigated the congested streets, carrying goods to businesses I might have helped build during my 4 decades in construction. The city I'd helped shape continued its daily rhythm without me, indifferent to my fading presence. The memories came in waves now, triggered by the morphine and my weakened state. I saw myself as a young father, coming home covered in sawdust and concrete dust, too tired to play catch with Michael, too stressed about making ends meet to listen to Jennifer's stories about her day at school, too focused on tomorrow's job to appreciate Susan's artwork covering our refrigerator. Sarah had been the bridge between my world and theirs, translating my exhausted silences into love, my absent presence into caring. But Sarah was gone now, and without her gentle mediation, the distance between my children and me had grown into an unbridgeable chasm. The funeral had been awkward, filled with stilted conversations and obligations nobody wanted to acknowledge. In the 2 years since, our interactions had dwindled to perfunctory holiday calls and birthday cards signed by grandchildren who barely knew me. Had I been a good father? The question tormented me as I lay there, dependent on machines for every breath. I'd worked 16-hour days to give them opportunities I'd never had. I'd put them through college, helped with down payments on houses, been there for every major milestone. Or had I? Looking back, I realized I'd been present in body but often absent in spirit, my mind always on the next job, the next payment, the next responsibility. The lunch tray arrived with food I couldn't taste and had little appetite for anyway. The young dietary aide who brought it, a college student working her way through school, I imagined, smiled brightly and asked about my day as if I were a beloved grandfather rather than a stranger dying alone. Her kindness was like water in a desert, precious and brief. As afternoon settled over the hospital, I found myself studying my hands where they lay folded on top of the thin blanket. These hands had built houses, changed diapers, signed mortgage papers, and wiped away tears. They'd held Sarah during her final days and tried desperately to comfort her as the cancer stole her away piece by piece. But they hadn't held my children close enough or long enough, hadn't reached out when pride and stubbornness built walls between us. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who'd spent his life building had somehow failed to construct the most important thing of all, lasting relationships with the people who mattered most. I'd been so focused on providing for my family's physical needs that I'd neglected the emotional foundation that holds families together through difficult times. A chaplain appeared in my doorway around 3 o'clock, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. She introduced herself as Reverend Martinez and asked if I'd like some company. Something about her presence, unpretentious and genuinely caring, made me nod, despite my reluctance to discuss matters of faith with a stranger. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, settling into the visitor's chair beside my bed. "Like a man who's run out of road," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. She smiled at that, not the practiced smile of professional sympathy, but something real and understanding. Sometimes that's when the real journey begins. What journey? I'm dying alone in a hospital room. My family... I couldn't finish the sentence. "Your family isn't here right now," she said gently, "but you're not alone. You're never really alone." I wanted to scoff at the religious platitude, but something in her voice stopped me. She didn't speak with the certainty of someone who'd never suffered, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd walked through darkness and found light on the other side. We talked for nearly an hour about life, regret, forgiveness, and the hope that exists even in the darkest moments. When she left, she squeezed my hand and promised to pray for me. I thanked her, meaning it more than I'd expected to. As evening approached and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, I found myself thinking about her words. "You're never really alone." What did that mean? For a man whose bed was surrounded by empty chairs and whose phone never rang with loving voices checking on his condition. The sunset painted my room in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and fleeting like everything else in life. I closed my eyes and tried to pray again, not for healing or for my family to come, but for understanding, for peace, for forgiveness, both to give and to receive. In the growing darkness, I felt that strange presence again, stronger now, as if something was drawing near that I couldn't see but could somehow sense, approaching like a storm on the horizon. The third night in Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital stretched before me like an eternity wrapped in medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaning solutions. My condition had worsened throughout the day, each breath becoming a conscious battle against lungs that felt heavy as wet concrete. The doctors had increased my oxygen flow twice and added another medication to the IV cocktail dripping steadily into my arm. Their clinical efficiency, a stark reminder that I was losing ground in a war my body couldn't win. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my attending physician, had stopped by around dinner time with the kind of carefully composed expression that medical professionals perfect when delivering difficult news. Her words were gentle but clear. The pneumonia wasn't responding to treatment as well as they'd hoped, and my weakened immune system was struggling to mount an effective defense. She spoke about comfort care and quality of life with the practiced compassion of someone who'd had these conversations hundreds of times before. "We'll keep you comfortable, Mr. Harrison," she'd assured me, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "Is there anyone we should call? Any family members who should be here?" I'd shaken my head, not trusting my voice to explain that the people who should have been there had made their choice already. 3 days of silence was answer enough. Dr. Reeves had nodded with understanding that went beyond her medical training. She'd seen this before, patients facing their final days surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment, but devoid of human connection. The evening news droned from the television mounted on the wall, reporting on traffic accidents and political disputes and weather patterns that would outlast me. I watched without really seeing, my mind drifting between memory and medication-induced haze. The world outside my window was settling into another Denver night, families gathering around dinner tables, children being tucked into beds by parents who loved them, couples sharing the quiet intimacy of long marriages. Carmen returned for the night shift, her presence a small comfort in the growing darkness. She checked my vitals with gentle efficiency, adjusted my pillows, and asked if I needed anything for pain. What I needed couldn't be measured in milligrams or delivered through an IV, but I appreciated her asking, "Are you comfortable, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. "As comfortable as a dying man can be," I replied, then immediately regretted the bitter edge in my voice. She didn't deserve my anger at circumstances beyond anyone's control. Carmen didn't flinch at my honesty. Instead, she pulled the visitor's chair closer to my bed and sat down. "Would you like to talk about it?" Something about her invitation, simple and non-judgmental, broke through the wall I'd built around my pain. Words began pouring out of me like water through a burst dam. The loneliness, the regret, the crushing weight of dying, surrounded by people who cared professionally but not personally. I told her about my children, about the distances that had grown between us over the years, about the family dinners that had become obligations rather than celebrations. "I worked so hard to give them everything," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the mechanical breathing assistance. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot to give them me." Carmen listened without interruption, her dark eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that spoke of her own experiences with loss and regret. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Sometimes the people we love are too hurt to know how to show their love back," she said gently. "That doesn't mean the love isn't there." "Then where are they?" The question came out more like a plea than I'd intended. "I don't know," she admitted with refreshing honesty, "but I know that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's buried under years of pain and misunderstanding. Sometimes it takes something dramatic to bring it to the surface." After Carmen left to continue her rounds, I lay in the darkness thinking about her words. Outside my window, Denver sparkled with 10,000 lights, each one representing lives being lived, stories being written, connections being made and broken and mended. Somewhere in that sprawling city, my children were probably putting their own children to bed, dealing with their own struggles and responsibilities and regrets. Did they ever think about me? Did they wonder how I was doing in this sterile room, fighting for each breath? Or had they moved on, written me off as a chapter in their lives they'd rather forget? The uncertainty was perhaps worse than knowing would have been. The pain medication was making me drowsy, but every time I began to drift off, a coughing fit would rack my body and remind me of my deteriorating condition. The nurses had warned me that the night might be difficult, their euphemistic language a gentle way of suggesting this could be among my last. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of resignation settling over my shoulders like a familiar coat. Around midnight, the coughing became so severe that David rushed in with additional medication and a respiratory therapist who worked to clear my airways. The episode left me exhausted and gasping, my heart racing from the effort of fighting for air. When they finally left me alone again, I felt something shift inside my chest, not physically but emotionally, like a dam finally giving way to pressures that had been building for years. The tears came then, the first I'd shed since Sarah's funeral 2 years ago. They flowed silently down my weathered cheeks, carrying with them all the accumulated grief, regret, and loneliness I'd been holding inside. I cried for the father I'd failed to be, for the husband I wished I'd been better at being, for the grandfather my grandchildren would barely remember. I cried for opportunities missed and words left unspoken, and bridges burned by pride too stubborn to bend. Most of all, I cried for the profound loneliness of facing death without the comfort of family voices or familiar hands to hold. The isolation felt complete and absolute, a darkness deeper than the October night outside my window. I was utterly, devastatingly alone. But as the tears subsided and my breathing settled into a labored rhythm, something remarkable happened. The oppressive weight of abandonment that had been crushing my spirit for days began to lift, replaced by something I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't hope exactly, and it certainly wasn't denial of my circumstances. It was more like anticipation, as if something important was approaching, something that would change everything. The air in the room felt charged, electric with possibility. The mechanical sounds of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the distant murmur of the nurse's station seemed to fade into background noise. A profound stillness settled over everything, the kind of deep quiet that comes before dawn or after snow has muffled all sound. I closed my eyes and felt myself sinking into that silence, not with the resignation of defeat, but with the peaceful surrender of someone who has finally stopped fighting against the inevitable. Whatever was coming, I would meet it with what dignity I could muster, alone but no longer afraid. In that moment of complete surrender, I felt a presence entering my room that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, not threatening, but overwhelmingly powerful, not frightening, but so filled with love and compassion that it took what little breath I had away. I opened my eyes. He stood at the foot of my bed, and I knew immediately who he was, though no earthly description could have prepared me for the reality of his presence. This wasn't the sanitized, ethereal figure from stained glass windows or Sunday school illustrations. This was someone whose very being radiated such love and authority that the sterile hospital room seemed to transform around him, becoming something sacred and set apart. Jesus looked exactly as I'd somehow always known he would, not with the pale European features of traditional artwork, but with the weathered face of a man who'd known work and suffering, joy and sorrow. His eyes held depths I couldn't fathom, dark and warm and infinitely compassionate. His hands bore scars that told a story of sacrifice I'd heard 1,000 times but never truly understood until this moment. He was dressed simply, his clothes neither ancient robes nor modern attire, but somehow both and neither, timeless in a way that transcended fashion or era. The most striking thing about him wasn't his appearance, though, but the atmosphere he brought with him. The very air seemed to shimmer with peace so profound, it made my heart stop racing for the first time in days. The mechanical sounds of my life support faded to whispers, and even my labored breathing became easier. I tried to speak, to ask the questions that flooded my mind, but no words would come. Instead, I felt his love washing over me like warm water, cleansing away years of pain and disappointment and self-doubt. It was the kind of love I'd spent my entire life seeking, unconditional, unwavering, complete. The love of a perfect father for a cherished child. The love I'd tried to give my own children but had somehow fallen short of expressing. He moved around the bed with fluid grace, not walking exactly but gliding, and I realized that the laws of physics seemed to bend around him. When he reached my side, he extended his hand, that scarred, beautiful hand, and touched my forehead with fingers that felt both human and divine. "William," he said, and my name in his voice sounded like music, like home, like everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. My beloved child. The words broke something open inside me, some last barrier I'd built around my heart to protect it from further disappointment. I began to weep again, but these weren't tears of sorrow or regret. These were tears of recognition, of homecoming, of a love so vast and encompassing that my human heart could barely contain it. "Lord," I finally managed to whisper, my voice rough with emotion and oxygen deprivation. "I'm dying. I'm alone. My family." "You are never alone," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "You have never been alone. Even in your darkest moments, even when you felt most abandoned, I have been with you." I wanted to argue, to list all the times I'd felt completely isolated, all the moments when God had seemed distant or silent. But looking into his eyes, I saw the truth of his words reflected back at me. In every moment of despair, there had been some small mercy. Carmen's gentle hands, David's kind smile, Reverend Martinez's timely visit, the sunset painting my room in gold. I'd been focusing so intently on who wasn't there that I'd missed all the ways he had been. But my children," I said, the words torn from the deepest wound in my heart. "They don't want me. They've forgotten me." Jesus moved closer, and I felt his presence like sunlight after a long, cold winter. "Do you remember when Michael was 12 and broke your prized possession, that antique fishing reel your father had given you?" I did remember. Michael had been playing in my workshop when he shouldn't have been there, and in his curiosity, he'd knocked the reel from its special place on the shelf. It had shattered beyond repair, and I'd been furious. I'd yelled at him, words I'd regretted but never taken back, and sent him to his room in tears. "You were angry," Jesus continued, "but did you stop loving him?" "Of course not," I whispered. "He was my son. I was disappointed, but I never stopped loving him. And when he grew older and made choices that hurt you, when he rebelled, when he said things in anger he didn't mean, when he seemed to reject everything you'd tried to teach him, did you stop loving him then?" The memories flooded back. Michael at 16, screaming that he hated me during an argument about his grades. Michael at 21, choosing to spend Christmas with his girlfriend's family instead of coming home. Michael in his 30s, too busy with his own life to call regularly or visit often. Through all of it, through every disappointment and moment of distance, my love for him had remained constant, even when I hadn't known how to express it. "No," I admitted. "I never stopped loving him. Even when he hurt me, even when we couldn't seem to talk without arguing, I loved him." Jesus smiled, and that smile contained all the warmth of every sunrise, every loving embrace, every moment of perfect understanding I'd ever experienced. How much more do you think he loves you? How much more do you think they all love you? Love doesn't disappear because it's buried under hurt and misunderstanding and the accumulated failures of human communication. It waits, like seeds under snow, ready to bloom when the right conditions return. Then why aren't they here? The question came out broken, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. "Because they're afraid," he said gently. Afraid that too much time has passed. Afraid that you won't forgive them for staying away. Afraid that their presence might be unwelcome after so much silence. They carry the same regrets you do, the same wishes for words unsaid and moments missed. They love you, but they don't know how to bridge the distance anymore. His words hit me like a revelation, turning my understanding upside down. I'd been so focused on feeling abandoned that I hadn't considered they might feel equally lost, equally uncertain about how to reach across the chasm that had opened between us over the years. Instead of rejection, their absence might be evidence of their own pain, their own fear of making things worse by showing up when they weren't sure they'd be welcome. "What do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How do I fix this? How do I let them know?" Jesus reached into his robe and pulled out something that made my heart stop. My old cell phone, the one that had been sitting silent on the bedside table for 3 days. But now, it was glowing with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from within. "Call them," he said simply. "Tell them what's in your heart. Tell them you love them. Tell them you forgive them for any hurt they think they've caused. Tell them you want them here, not because you're dying, but because they're your family and you've missed them terribly." I took the phone with trembling hands, surprised to find that my fingers weren't shaking anymore and my breathing had become easier. The screen showed missed calls, dozens of them, from all 3 of my children, from my grandchildren, from numbers I didn't recognize but somehow knew were friends and relatives who'd been trying to reach me. "They've been calling?" I asked in wonder. "They've never stopped calling," Jesus said. "But sometimes we're so wrapped up in our own pain that we can't hear the love that's trying to reach us." As I scrolled through the missed calls and messages, tears of gratitude replaced tears of sorrow. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't abandoned me. They'd been reaching out all along, and somehow, whether through medication or despair or my own stubborn pride, I hadn't been able to receive their love. The room began to brighten with a light that had nothing to do with the hospital's fluorescent fixtures. Jesus stepped back, but his presence remained strong, supportive, filling every corner of the room with peace and possibility. "Make the calls," he said. "Tell them you love them. Tell them to come home." With trembling fingers that felt stronger than they had in days, I touched Michael's name on the phone screen. The call connected on the first ring, as if he'd been sitting beside his phone, waiting. "Dad, Dad, is that you?" His voice was thick with emotion, barely controlled panic mixed with desperate hope. "Michael," I whispered, his name catching in my throat. "Son." "Oh God, Dad. We've been trying to reach you for days. The hospital called us when you were admitted, but you wouldn't take our calls. And we thought you didn't want us there. We thought maybe you were still angry about—" "I'm not angry," I interrupted, the words flowing from a heart suddenly capable of perfect clarity. "I was never angry. I was hurt, and I was proud, and I was stupid. But I was never angry. Not at you. Not at any of you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for heartbeats before Michael spoke again, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry we weren't there. I'm sorry for everything, for all the fights, for staying away, for being too stubborn to pick up the phone and just talk to you." "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. And I meant it completely. The resentment and hurt that had been eating at my heart for years seemed to have simply vanished, replaced by something far more powerful: understanding. We both made mistakes. We both let pride get in the way of love. How are you doing, Dad? The doctor said you were very sick." I glanced toward where Jesus had been standing, but I could no longer see him clearly. His presence remained, though like sunlight filtering through clouds, warming everything it touched. "I'm dying, son," I said gently, "but I'm not alone anymore, and I'm not afraid. Don't say that. You're going to be fine. You have to be fine. Michael, listen to me. I need you to hear this. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it, even when work got in the way, even when we couldn't seem to talk without arguing. You are my son, and I am proud of the man you've become." The sound of his crying came through the phone clearly, and my own tears began again. But these were different tears, healing tears, tears that washed away decades of accumulated misunderstanding. "I love you too, Dad," he sobbed. "I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to come back after so much time had passed." "Come now," I said. "Come home. Bring your family. Bring Jennifer and Susan. Let me see my grandchildren. Let me tell them all how much I love them." "We're already on our way," Michael said. "We've been in the parking lot for an hour, trying to work up the courage to come upstairs. We'll be right there, Dad. We'll be right there." The call ended, and immediately the phone rang again. Jennifer's number appeared on the screen. "Daddy." Her voice was small, like the little girl she'd been when she used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. "Is it really you?" "It's me, sweetheart," I said, my heart expanding with love for this daughter who had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who tried to bridge the gaps between us all. "I'm so scared, Daddy. I'm so scared we're going to lose you before we can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I told her, with certainty that surprised even me. "There's only love to share, only love to give and receive. Everything else was just noise." "I wanted to visit so many times," she said through her tears. "After Mom died, I wanted to be there for you, but you seemed so angry, so closed off. And then time passed, and it felt like it was too late." "It's never too late for love," I said, words that felt both mine and not mine, as if they were being given to me to share. "It's never too late to come home." We talked for several more minutes, Jennifer telling me about her children, about her job at the elementary school, about the life she'd been living while we'd been apart. Every word was precious, every shared memory a gift I hadn't expected to receive. When Susan called, her voice carried the artistic sensitivity that had always made her the most emotionally expressive of my children. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she began, but I stopped her. "No more apologies," I said firmly, but lovingly. "No more regrets. We're family, and family means starting over whenever we need to. It means forgiveness without conditions and love without end." "I painted you a picture," she said softly. "Last month, for your birthday. I painted the old house on Alameda the way it looked when we were kids. I've been carrying it in my car, wanting to give it to you, but not knowing how to make the first move." "Bring it with you," I said. "Bring it tonight. I want to see it." One by one, my children arrived. Michael first, tall and graying now, but still my boy, his eyes red from crying. Jennifer with her gentle smile, and her husband Rick, whom I'd foolishly allowed distance to keep me from knowing better. Susan with her artist's intensity, and her two teenage children who looked at me with curious eyes, trying to reconcile the grandfather they barely knew with the man their mother had described. The hospital room that had felt like a tomb just hours earlier was suddenly filled with life, with voices overlapping as everyone tried to talk at once, with tears and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family reunion. Carmen had to bring in extra chairs, and even then, people were sitting on the window ledge and leaning against walls. As the evening progressed and visiting hours were officially over, rules the staff chose to overlook given the circumstances, I found myself surrounded by 3 generations of love I'd thought I'd lost. My grandchildren, no longer the small children I remembered, but teenagers and young adults with their own personalities and dreams, asked questions about my life, about their grandmother, about family history I'd never thought they'd want to know. Jennifer showed me photos on her phone of family gatherings I'd missed, birthday parties and holidays, and ordinary Tuesday dinners where my absence had been noted and mourned. Susan unpacked her painting, and when she held it up for me to see, I gasped at its beauty. Our old house rendered in warm, golden light, capturing not just how it had looked, but how it had felt when we were all together. "It's perfect," I breathed. "It's absolutely perfect." Michael pulled his chair closer to the bed and took my hand in both of his. "Dad, why didn't we do this sooner? Why did we let so much time pass?" I looked around the room, at these faces I loved more than life itself, at the evidence of love that had never truly disappeared, but had simply been waiting for the courage to show itself. Where Jesus had stood earlier, I now saw only my family, but his presence filled the room through their love, their forgiveness, their willingness to put aside old hurts and choose connection over separation. "Because we're human," I said simply. "Because we're flawed and proud, and sometimes we don't know how to love each other as well as we want to. But we're here now. We're together now, and that's what matters." As the night deepened, they took turns holding my hand, sharing stories, asking the kinds of deep questions that families ask when they know time is running short. The grandchildren, who had been strangers when the evening began, were now curled up beside me, listening to tales of their parents, childhoods with wide-eyed fascination. The healing that was taking place wasn't physical. My lungs were still compromised, my body still failing, but it was profound nonetheless. Every word of love spoken, every moment of connection shared, every laugh and tear and gentle touch was weaving us back together into the family we'd always been, but had forgotten how to be. Dawn found us still together, a family reunited not by crisis alone, but by something far more powerful. The choice to love beyond hurt, to forgive beyond reason, to reach across the chasms we'd allowed to develop between us. The early morning light filtering through the hospital window illuminated faces that had been strangers to each other just hours before, but now looked like what they'd always been, pieces of the same heart, branches of the same tree. My breathing had improved remarkably during the night, a development that baffled the medical staff but didn't surprise me. Dr. Reeves arrived for her morning rounds to find my room filled with family, and my vital signs significantly better than they'd been since my admission. "This is unexpected," she said, studying my chart with professional curiosity. "Your oxygen saturation is up, your heart rate has stabilized, and your breathing seems much less labored. Sometimes, the presence of loved ones can have remarkable effects on recovery." I caught Michael's eye and smiled. "And sometimes miracles happen," I said simply. The doctor nodded, though whether in agreement or skeptical acknowledgement, I couldn't tell. She adjusted my medications downward and spoke cautiously about cautious optimism, the kind of careful hope that medical professionals offer when the impossible seems to be occurring. As the day progressed, my children took turns staying with me while the others went home to shower and change clothes and make arrangements to extend their time in Denver. The grandchildren, who had been hesitant strangers when they first arrived, now competed for turns sitting beside my bed, asking endless questions about my life, their grandmother, the family history they'd been too young or too distant to learn before. "Tell me about when Mum was little," asked Emma, Jennifer's 16-year-old daughter, who had inherited her mother's gentle spirit and her grandmother's expressive eyes. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told in years. Jennifer's first day of school when she'd cried because she thought she'd never see her family again. The Christmas when 6-year-old Michael had stayed up all night trying to catch Santa Claus. The summer Susan had decided to paint a mural on her bedroom wall, and I'd been too enchanted by her artistic vision to make her stop. "You were a good dad," Emma said softly when I finished a particularly embarrassing story about Michael's attempt to build a rocket in our backyard. "Mum always said you were. She said you just forgot sometimes." The simple wisdom of a 16-year-old cut straight to the heart of it. I hadn't been a terrible father, just a distracted one. I hadn't stopped loving my children, just stopped knowing how to show it in ways they could understand. The years of distance hadn't been built on fundamental incompatibility, but on a series of small miscommunications and missed opportunities that had accumulated like sediment, gradually obscuring the love that had always been there. By afternoon, the hospital room had become an impromptu family reunion. Susan's husband arrived with their youngest son, a college freshman who shyly showed me photos of his artwork, talent that ran in the family, apparently. Jennifer's other children came straight from school, backpacks still slung over their shoulders, chattering excitedly about the grandfather they were finally getting to know. The conversations flowed naturally between generations, sometimes serious discussions about life and faith and what it means to be family, sometimes silly exchanges filled with the kind of laughter that had been absent from our gatherings for far too long. I watched my adult children interact with each other and realized they had maintained relationships I'd feared were broken, that they'd been supporting each other through the years when I'd been absent from their lives. "We talked about you all the time," Susan admitted when I mentioned this observation. "We wondered how you were doing, whether you were lonely after Mom died, whether we should call or visit. But you seemed so self-sufficient, so determined to handle everything on your own." "I was scared," I admitted. "After your mother died, I didn't know how to be part of a family without her there to translate between us. She was the one who knew how to say the things I felt but couldn't express." "You're expressing them pretty well now," Michael pointed out with a smile that reminded me of his mother. As evening approached, Carmen returned for her shift and found the room transformed. Where she'd left a dying man surrounded only by medical equipment, she now discovered a celebration of family connection that had somehow worked its own kind of healing magic. "Mr. Harrison," she said with wonder in her voice, "you look like a completely different person." "I am a completely different person," I replied, and meant it absolutely. The medical improvements continued through the day. My appetite returned for the first time since my admission, and I actually enjoyed the dinner that arrived, or perhaps food simply tasted better when shared with people you loved. My coughing fits became less frequent and less severe, and the crushing weight that had been pressing on my chest began to ease. But the most remarkable change wasn't physical. It was the transformation in my spirit, the lifting of a burden I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. The loneliness that had been my constant companion since Sarah's death had been replaced by something I'd thought I'd lost forever. The joy of being fully known and completely loved by the people who mattered most. As the second night with my family began, I found myself thinking about Jesus' visit, wondering if it had been real or simply the hallucination of a dying, desperate mind. But as I looked around the room at faces filled with love and forgiveness, at grandchildren curled up in chairs beside my bed, at children who had become adults but were still, in many ways, my babies, I realized it didn't matter whether the visitation had been literal or spiritual or psychological. What mattered was the result. A family restored, love renewed, bridges rebuilt from the materials of grace and forgiveness. Whether through divine intervention or human courage or some combination of both, we had found our way back to each other. "Dad," Jennifer said softly, as the others settled in for another night of keeping vigil, "are you afraid anymore?" I considered the question seriously before answering. The medical reality hadn't changed. My body was still failing, my time still limited, but the existential terror that had been consuming me had completely disappeared, replaced by a peace so profound it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "No," I said with certainty, "I'm not afraid. How can I be afraid when I'm surrounded by so much love?" She smiled and kissed my forehead, and in that simple gesture, I felt the blessing of a daughter's love, the continuation of something larger than any individual life. Whether I lived days or weeks or longer, whether this reunion lasted through recovery or became a gentle goodbye, I was no longer dying alone. I was living fully and completely in the embrace of family love that had never truly died, but had simply been waiting for the courage to resurrect itself. 3 weeks later, I walked out of Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital under my own power, something the medical staff called miraculous, but my family and I knew had more to do with the healing power of love than any pharmaceutical intervention. The pneumonia had cleared almost completely. My strength had returned gradually but steadily, and my vital signs had stabilized in ways that defied the initial prognosis. Dr. Reeves, ever the scientist, attributed my recovery to the remarkable effects of family support on patient outcomes. But I caught her glance toward the small wooden cross Jennifer had brought me, and I suspected she understood there were forces at work beyond what medical textbooks could explain. The day of my discharge was crisp and clear, early November in Denver, painting the sky a brilliant blue that reminded me of hope made visible. Michael had brought my clothes from home, clothes that hung loosely now, but would fill out again as I regained my appetite for life along with my appetite for food. Susan carried her painting carefully wrapped in protective paper, already planning where to hang it in my bedroom so I'd see it every morning when I woke up. Jennifer held my arm steadily as we made our way through the hospital corridors, her touch both protective and proud. The house on Maple Street, a smaller place I'd moved to after Sarah died because the old house held too many memories, had been transformed during my hospital stay. My children had worked together to make it ready for my return, cleaning and organizing, stocking the refrigerator, setting up a schedule to ensure someone checked on me daily until I was fully recovered. But more than the physical preparations, they'd transformed something in themselves. The hesitant, guilty reunion that had begun in my hospital room had blossomed into genuine, rediscovered relationships. They were texting each other regularly, making plans for Thanksgiving together, talking about family traditions they wanted to revive and new ones they wanted to create. "It's like Mom always said," Jennifer remarked as we pulled into my driveway. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. We chose each other again." The first few days home were an adjustment. My body was still rebuilding its strength, and simple tasks like climbing stairs or preparing meals required more effort than I'd expected. But I wasn't alone in the recovery. Someone appeared at my door every day, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with home-cooked meals, sometimes just to sit and talk about ordinary things that felt extraordinary after years of silence between us. Michael helped me set up a computer so I could video chat with grandchildren away at college. And we spent hours going through old photo albums, filling in gaps in family history and sharing stories I'd thought were lost forever. Susan organized a painting session in my backyard, teaching her children and me the basics of watercolor, while Emma documented everything with her phone, creating what she called a grandpa recovery documentary. The Sunday dinners resumed naturally, without formal announcement or grand gesture. Jennifer simply called one Saturday and said, "We're coming over tomorrow after church to make dinner. Susan's bringing dessert, Michael's handling the grill, and you're providing the kitchen and the blessing." It felt so normal, so right, that I couldn't remember why we'd ever stopped. As autumn deepened into winter, I found myself thinking often about the night Jesus had visited my hospital room. Had it really happened, or had my desperate mind created the experience I needed to find the courage to call my children? I'd stopped trying to answer that question definitively because I'd realized it was the wrong question entirely. The right question was, what had changed? And the answer to that was everything. I'd learned that love doesn't diminish with time or distance if it's real love, the kind that runs deeper than circumstances or pride or the accumulated small failures of human communication. I'd discovered that family isn't about perfection, but about persistence, about choosing each other again and again, despite disappointment and misunderstanding, and the inevitable ways we hurt the people we love most. Most importantly, I'd experienced firsthand what Jesus had tried to tell me that night. We are never really alone. Love surrounds us in ways we can't always see or recognize, waiting for us to open our hearts enough to let it in. Sometimes that love comes through divine visitation, sometimes through the gentle hands of a night shift nurse, sometimes through the courage of adult children who decide to risk vulnerability for the sake of connection. Christmas that year was unlike any we'd celebrated since the children were small. My house overflowed with 3 generations of family, the noise and chaos and beautiful disorder of people who love each other enough to show up authentically, imperfectly, completely. Emma and her cousins commandeered my kitchen to make cookies using Sarah's old recipes, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla and the sound of teenage laughter. As I sat in my living room watching my family, I felt Sarah's presence in a way I hadn't since her death. Not as a ghost or visitation, but as a living legacy in the faces around me, the love that connected us all, the home we'd created together that had survived separation and was now being renewed. Michael approached me as the evening was winding down, his own children helping to clean up the cheerful mess we'd made of my usually tidy house. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you something." "What's that, son?" "That night in the hospital, when you called us, something was different about your voice. You sounded, I don't know how to describe it, like you were speaking from someplace deeper than just you, like someone was helping you find the right words." I looked at this man who was my son, but also now my friend, who had learned to see beyond the surface to the mystery that sometimes breaks through ordinary life. "Maybe someone was," I said simply. "And do you really believe that?" I considered the question while watching Susan help her youngest son with a complicated jigsaw puzzle, their heads bent together in concentration and connection. Jennifer was in the kitchen with her daughters, sharing stories that made them all laugh until they had to lean against each other for support. This was my family, my legacy, my miracle made manifest in ordinary love, shared courageously. "I believe in love that's stronger than death," I said finally. "I believe in grace that can heal what seems broken beyond repair. I believe that sometimes, when we need it most, heaven touches earth and shows us what's always been true, but we couldn't see it." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Mom would have loved this," he said, gesturing toward the scene of domestic happiness surrounding us. "She does love this," I replied with certainty. "Love doesn't end. It just changes form." As my family prepared to leave that night, loading cars with leftover food and presents and the detritus of celebration, I stood in my doorway, watching them go. But this wasn't the hollow goodbye of people separating indefinitely. This was the gentle parting of people who knew they'd see each other soon, who had phone numbers programmed in their phones and plans on their calendars and love in their hearts that would bridge any distance. Emma was the last to leave, running back to give me one more hug. "I love you, Grandpa," she said, with the unself-conscious affection of 16. "I'm so glad we found each other again." "We never lost each other, sweetheart," I told her. "We just forgot for a while how to look." That night, alone in my house but no longer lonely, I said a prayer of gratitude for the miracle of second chances, for the grace that makes all things new, for the love that never fails, even when we fail to recognize it, whether through divine intervention or human courage or the mysterious alchemy of both. I had been given the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to love and be loved completely before it was too late. Outside my window, snow began to fall on the Denver suburbs, covering the familiar landscape in pristine white. Inside, my heart was warm with the presence of family love, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, I would never again face it alone. The miracle hadn't been my physical healing, remarkable as that was. The miracle had been the resurrection of love I thought was dead, the rebuilding of bridges I thought were permanently burned, The discovery that grace can reach anywhere, even into sterile hospital rooms where old men lie dying alone, except they're not alone at all. They never were, dear listeners. We hope William Harrison's story touched your heart. If you'd like to keep experiencing powerful stories like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Every day we share stories that reveal the depth of life and the human heart. We'll be waiting for you in the comments.